Hello, audience members. Before I start my talk, I would like to ask all of you two specific questions. And if you have any experience in this, simply nod your head away. So are you guys ready? Great. Question number one. Is there anyone in this room who had experienced anyone being hostile to them and ended up in a very frustrating situation? I see noddings. Sure. Question number two. Have you ever spent time at any public transport stations or parks? Or are you guys not nodding? Because if you've lived in Hong Kong for a while now, you have probably, I hope most of you have already probably used the greatest, most convenient transportation systems of all time in Hong Kong, called the MTR. With the MTR, you can actually travel to so many places, and I think you already know that. But also, I think you also have seen so many hostile architecture more often than you realize. So, what is hostile architecture? Recently, the desire to exclude unwanted people and unwanted behavior led to the establishment of what is called hostile architecture. And hostile architecture comes in many different names, such as defensive architecture, disciplinary architecture, excluding architecture, and as well as evil architecture. The names sounding more and more like it is a devil's work. And one prime example of hostile architecture are benches whose design prevents people from lying down on them completely. And they were also given unpleasant nicknames, such as anti-hobo benches or bump-proof benches. And these terms were coined by Carl Define de Lichit in his research paper called The Critical Discussion of the Seemingly Offensive Art of Keeping People Away. So why are these benches considered hostile architecture? One big reason was that they are very uncomfortable to rest on and unsuitable for permanent rest. And sometimes they have armrests on them. They have slopey seats, as well as made out of slippery materials, such as stainless steel. And all of these modifications makes it hard for people to sit on them. However, not all defensive measures in hostile architecture are this provocative, such as window spikes. And window spikes are usually installed in windows. They are typically used to turn away unwanted presence nearby, be it animals or the people you hate. The defensive measures in hostile architecture varies in its intensity, but still, hostile architecture causes so many controversies, with some people arguing that it is not the right or decent way to treat a part of your community. And according to Hostile Design Organization, they describe hostile architecture as designs that is intended to exclude, harm, or otherwise hinder the freedom of human being, which refers to all of us. But that is an incorrect statement, because hostile architecture actually has a disproportionate impact on people, especially with different statuses. And this style of architecture hugely affects the poor and homeless communities. And this is one of its biggest cons. So, how do we, in Hong Kong, a city filled with the most innovative architecture and urban planning in the world, how do we get the right ideal balance of hostile architecture in the city? But first, I would like to mention some of the pros that can be said about hostile architecture. Hostile architecture could actually encourage people to seek shelters and control some rowdy behaviors in public spaces. Hostile architecture could also be seen as the local government's efforts to stop people from loitering around and to drive them away and keep poverty unseen. And those sounds like really good benefit to us and to the whole society. But how does the poor and homeless communities truly feel about this? Since they're one of the groups that is most impacted by the changes that we do to our public structures, as it is likely that they are the most frequent users for them, then I believe that future architects or urban planners should have the opportunity to sit down with them, share a table, discuss, all the viable options, and whenever they are designated to design new public structures in their area. And I think communicating and connecting are some of the best ways to ensure that every group in the community's needs are satisfied and their rights assured. Therefore, hostile architecture doesn't necessarily disrespect us or anyone, but to some extent, it does put some burden on the poor communities, as some of them relies heavily on these public structures for their day-to-day activities. And although it is right to assume that some certain actions are correlated with certain groups, for example, people who have nowhere to sleep will likely sleep outdoors, researchers explicitly stated that if we find people sleeping outdoors problematic, whether they are homeless or not, we are concerned only with their behavior and not the group itself. Therefore, hostile architecture doesn't necessarily discriminate us, but still, we must not make all architecture hostile, because publicly shared spaces are meant for everyone, including disadvantaged and vulnerable groups. And the use of public shared space is always conditional. It is self-explanatory that we don't have the absolute right to do whatever we want in these public spaces. For example, damaging and vandalizing public properties are not acceptable. And just as researcher reached one of his conclusions, said that when designing the rights to public structures should always be weighed against other people's rights. Because, for example, some residents, of course, would like to have some control over their residential area because we wanna feel safe in our homes with all the people going in and out. And another scenario I would like you to imagine is that if a majority of the population wants to prohibit skateboarders as they causes damages to public properties, but all the locals had several meetings with them and they still wouldn't change their behavior, then at that point, hostile architecture may be necessary. And finally, researcher Lihit concluded in his conclusion that if you're designing public structures, all consequences must be considered and implement these designs with respect to everyone. And here are some photos of hostile architecture. If you could look at the picture on the right side, this is taken in a sports stadium. And the sports stadium has armrests installed to prevent people from lying on them and sleeping permanently on them overnight. And on the right-hand picture, if you traveled by the MTR today, and walk from the Kowloon MTR station to this destination, you might have encountered this on your way. And this is a shaded shelter. And you might have noticed there's an extra special feature, which are spikes. And this is used to prevent animals from, specifically birds, from landing and staying put at them, or else they will get themselves killed. And in our smaller community, I also have hostile pictures of benches. So on the right side, you might have seen this bench or very familiar with this bench because I have got a personal history and experience with them. And this bench is located at High School Division, Blue Court, and every recess, this bench is always, students always put so many things on this bench or sit down on them. And I usually get to sit on the very comfortable part, which has the extra fissure ones, which are called the bumps. And truthfully, it does hurt your bumps. So, and yes, and on the right side, this is a picture of a bench. It is made out of stainless steel. And if you were to move this bench and isolate it in another location, it would lose its ability to let people lean on the pool fences and sit down nicely. And if you isolate them and put them in another location, such as this stage, then I think it would lower its values, the value of the existence of the bench, because it would make your back hurt more. And these are the benches that I get the most hostility from during my school life every day. Thank you.